Hi there, I'm Lee Brainerd, and welcome to Soothkeep. Today I would like to encourage your hearts with another Rapture Nugget. Now, the subject I want to cover today is the glorious liberty of the believer that he's going to receive in the rapture. For instance, we read in Romans chapter 8:21, creation itself shall be delivered from the bondage of corruption into the glorious liberty of the children of God. This is one of my very favorite rapture passages. This is one of my very favorite passages on the blessings that the believer shall receive in the resurrection and enjoy for all of eternity. Now, notice two things in this verse. First of all, they're not receiving merely some liberty. They're receiving glorious liberty. And the second thing is that nature itself is going to be brought into the glorious liberty of the believer. Now let's look at some of the aspects of this glorious liberty that we are going to enjoy in the resurrection, in the eternal state for all of eternity. We're going to have no sin. No sin is going to be present in our eternal situation. So we're not going to face the devastating consequences of sin. If your eyes are opened, you've observed that sin is very destructive. Sin destroys your bodily health. Sin destroys your mental health, your emotional health, your psychological health. Sin can drain your bank account faster than you can say jumping jack flash. Sin can get you put in jail. Sin can get you beat up. Sin can get you destroyed. Sin can bring pain to your life. And there will be no sin in eternity. There's going to be no curse on nature and mankind. Can you imagine looking at nature when there's no curse on the planet? Now also imagine your body, where there'll be no sickness, no decay, no injury, no pain, no heartache, no death, no disease. This is almost, well, it's verging on impossible to wrap your mind around how glorious this is. But if you can, it's a very freeing blessing. Now, there's going to be no oppressive government in eternity. There's not going to be any government overreach. It's amazing to me that the most powerful being in the universe, when he comes down here to earth to establish his kingdom, he gives mankind more freedom than man has ever enjoyed since creation. The only thing that's going to be banned, folks, is sin. And the only reason sin is banned is not because God is a party pooper. It's because God doesn't want things to be in the kingdom, in his eternal kingdom, that will harm you, hurt you, give you pain. Now, not only is there not going to be any oppressive government, and there's not going to be any government overreach, there's not going to be any excessive taxation. Taxation robs men of their productivity. In many nations of the world, by the time you add up all the local taxes and the hidden taxes that are accrued along the line of a process of manufacturing and productivity till it comes down to you, and you add in the state taxes, and you add in the federal taxes, and you add in any other tax that might be applicable, this eats into your productivity. I was talking recently to friends in Israel, and when they buy a car made in another country, there's an 80% tax on importing that vehicle. That's a huge gouging of your productivity. But in eternity, there will be no gouging by taxes. We're probably going to have something just along the lines of that straightforwards. Everyone gives 10% tithe out of their productivity to God, and everything else is yours. That kind of freedom has never been seen on the planet under organized government, but it will be glorious freedom in the kingdom. Now, The other thing we're not going to see is there's not going to be any disease, there's going to be no sickness, there's not going to be any maladies. These things rob our time, they rob us of our opportunity, they rob us of our well-being. I remember years ago I wanted to go on a mountain climbing trip in the Beartooth Wilderness in Montana with my boys and some of their friends, and I was all geared up to go, and the week before the trip was supposed to happen, my back got injured, and now I couldn't go on the trip. So it robbed me of opportunity. It robbed me of the blessing. We will have no such robbery in the eternal state. There's not going to be any doctors or dentists or hospitals or pharmaceutical companies that are going to help drain our resources. We're not going to have to be shelling out of our productivity or out of our income. Not going to have to be shelling out to doctors, dentists, hospitals, and pharmaceutical companies. There'll be no need for these guys. We're not going to be drilling holes in our cash flow because we're paying lawyers and paying insurance. There's going to be no need for lawyers. There's going to be no need for insurance. There's going to be no bureaucracy of piles of forms and piles of licenses and fees and regulations that frustrate and hinder our efforts to go forth and do what we want to do. There's not going to be wars that are going to devastate our country, our state, our region, our city, our own property, that's going to destroy the productivity of the land. There's not going to be any crimes. There's no criminals. There's no gangs. There's no mafia. There won't be any hackers or phishing or viruses or spyware. Man, just this one alone gets me excited. And we won't need passwords and security measures, which are a frustration in and of themselves. There's not going to be any political divisions. There's not going to be Republicans and Democrats, and there's absolutely not going to be far leftist nutcases and Marxists and liberals. It's going to be common sense. And there's going to be one political party. His name is Jesus Christ. There's not going to be any religious divisions that create tension and problems and wars and bickering and fighting. It's going to be one religion with one variation. His name is Jesus Christ. There's not going to be any deep state. There won't be any secret societies that are going to have secret agendas. And there's not going to be any hidden conspiracies so that things are going on behind the scenes that you can't see on the front. There'll be perfect clarity. There'll be perfect openness. Perfect transparency 100% of the time. There's not going to be any artificial currency. There's not going to be any artificial financial systems. There's not going to be manipulated markets. There's not going to be a Federal Reserve. There's not going to be massive domineering banks and financial institutions. It's going to be a very simple free market economy that runs on love and giving. Can you imagine an economy where the currency is love and giving and not artificial fiat currency? Where everybody in this economy continues to grow in their own personal wealth for all of eternity, their own personal possessions, and their own personal things that they've accomplished and obtained, and at the same time, everybody is busy giving, and everybody increases. There will be no toiling away at jobs that you hate or despise or can barely tolerate as you're struggling to survive, struggling to keep your head above water. Everybody is going to have jobs that coincide with their loves, with their passions, with their hobbies, with their ambitions. Your job and your hobby, your job and your passion, your job and your love are going to be one and the same. Isn't this, to me, is an insanely wonderful perspective because, folks, I've only had a couple jobs in this life that I have enjoyed. There's only been a couple that I've really been good at. The rest of them have been jobs that are merely putting bread and butter on the table. We're not going to be dealing with unbelief-driven science, which is empowered by lies like evolution and relative morality. There's not going to be an agenda-driven media which shapes the message rather than delivers the message. And by the way, thinking about this, can you imagine what it's going to be like in eternity when there's really not going to be any exciting news in the way that we're used to having exciting news? There's not going to be anything in the news about wars and conspiracies and fighting and political problems and religious problems and death and crime. All that's going to be gone. I mean, can you imagine the most exciting thing in your local news is that your neighbor Joe grew a 3-pound tomato in his garden? Well, there'll probably be more exciting stuff than that, but it's going to be very different. Imagine a future where there's no extreme weather, where there's no devastating acts of God like hurricanes and volcanoes and tornadoes and meteorites and earthquakes that shake everything down and cover things with lava and destroy things. Nothing is ever going to be shaken again in that way. An eternity where there's no rust, there's no mold, there's no rot, there's no decay, there's no insect infestations, there's no plant and animal diseases that rob us of our goods and our productivity. There's not going to be mega corporations that dominate the food and agriculture industries that are forcing mediocre products upon us that harm us with carcinogens and poisons and garbage ingredients, and that douse us with pesticides, insecticides, and herbicides and desiccants that damage our health. And when you go down this path, you begin to realize there won't even be a need in eternity for labels like organic because, well, all of our food is going to be organic. And all of our bodily things like shampoo and soap will all be organic. Now, going down this path is really exciting, folks. There's going to be nothing in eternity that's going to disturb you, distress you, frustrate you, anger you, give you pain. There's going to be nothing that's going to rob you of your hard-earned productivity. There's nothing that's going to dispossess you of your life or your wealth or your health or your well-being or your happiness. There's not going to be any limitations in time, in resources, in energy or opportunity. You're going to be living in glorious, glorious freedom. So in conclusion, folks, be encouraged, be excited, have a vision, be filled with fire for what's coming because you have a wonderful eternity coming. There's going to be nothing to drag you down, nothing to discourage you, nothing to frustrate you. In fact, we read in Psalm 16:11, pleasures forevermore at the Father's right hand. Indeed, God promises in John 16:24, ask and receive that your joy may be full. It's God's purpose as the great omnipotent giver to give to you, to give to every believer so that your joy may be full. If you can't imagine God having the same giving heart as a giving Father, then you do not understand God, and your God is more of an idol than the God of the Bible. We're going to be heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ. So if you can imagine everything that's the possession of God in this entire creation, and then imagine that He's going to share it with you. Folks, for all practical purposes, you have an infinite inheritance coming. The poorest believer in eternity, judging by the kind of standards we judge by here on earth, is going to be wealthier than all the wealthiest people in all of history put together. And when we step from the sorrows and trials of this life across the threshold into eternity, it's going to be like a man carrying an extremely heavy uncomfortable pack in rugged territory, uphill, coming to the end of the hike and shucking his pack and feeling that relief, feeling light-footed again, except now multiply this 1,000-fold on steroids. It's going to be an amazing sense of not only feeling light and feeling free, but feeling clean. So train yourself, if you haven't already done this, to look beyond the sorrows and trials of this life and to look upon the grace and the glory that's going to be revealed to you and in you when the Lord Jesus comes for his people. We read in 1 Peter 1:13, for instance, set all your hope on the grace that shall be revealed to you. And we can paraphrase this, set all your hope on the glorious liberty that shall be revealed to you. Well, I trust that you've been encouraged by this Rapture Nugget, folks. A Rapture Nugget on the glorious liberty, the glorious freedom that's coming to the believers. Eyes wide open, brain engaged, heart on fire. We'll see you next time.